Thank you everyone for attending today. I call this virtual real-time meeting to order, operating under the resolution adopting procedures for public meetings under Nelson County's ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster and the governor's amendment to the budget bill adopted by the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library Board on May 18th, 2020. So with that context in place, my goal from today's meeting is sort of a planning meeting to just sort of talk about really the roadmap maybe for the next 18 months. The bread and butter of the policy committee is to sort of review the policies that are up for review every 10 years. So our current policies, each one needs to be reviewed every 10 years. And so there are a couple of those that are due in 2020. So we want to finish those by the end of this calendar year. And then of course, there are new ones that are in 2021 that will become due at that time as well. And then generally what in the past, we've had a schedule of meeting every 2 months. And I think that still, fits our needs for what we need to do. In between working through those sort of required reviews, I'd like to kind of move the ball forward in terms of just improving the overall state of policy at JMRL, and so make improvements as time permits. And sort of the two big picture things, neither is new, but I'd like to kind of get them on the table and kind of reestablish an interest in working on these again between now and sort of the end of 2021, so we're talking about 18-month time frame, are sort of a reorganization of the manual as a whole. This wouldn't really involve writing any new policy, but just making it more user-friendly in terms of, there are a couple of different stakeholders, for policy. There are individual patrons. What can we expect? What governs a patron's use of the library, what do they need to, and then there's sort of what can they expect, what can individual patrons expect from the library, can they expect librarians and the organization to act and behave. So there's sort of, patrons are one stakeholder. Employees and staff themselves are another very important stakeholder, and some of the policies are oriented toward them. And I've spent a little bit of time looking through my library trustee handbook, and I'll maybe invoke a couple of sections of that, but it definitely establishes personnel as a category of policy. Right now, the manual is kind of, there's a policy manual, it's kind of a mishmash in the sense that some of and there's also, I also want to mention, there's also just governance overall is another category of policy. So when do meetings happen? What public comment at a meeting, okay, is a policy, and that's sort of a governance. It's not a day-to-day use of the library that affects patrons on a day-to-day basis, but it's, how is the library going to govern? And it's again, talks to people that are involved in governance, but also the community that want to engage with library governance. What can they expect? So those are, I think there's three main categories off the top of my head. Right now, it's kind of a mishmash. Some of those are separated out, but there are a number of individual policies where, for example, photography was recently reviewed. There's a section in photography that talks about, here's what patrons may or may not do, regarding photography in the library. And then it kind of jumps to a section, well, here's what employees are supposed, should and should not do. And those are really two different messages aimed at two different stakeholders. And there are many, many kind of instances of that. Another kind of the first time this came to my mind was when we were reviewing a policy a couple of years ago. I think it was disciplinary actions. Okay, and it was completely addressing some staff procedural stuff. And my question is, well, wait, why is this part of the policy manual when it really has sort of a kind of this important but narrow focus that really doesn't interest day-to-day patrons? So David and I had started looking at that a year or two ago, and I think we have a sort of a working draft of that, of a reorg in place. And again, it wouldn't involve writing any new text at least in phase one of that, it would simply be renumbering a bunch of stuff, recategorizing some things, and again, making it more user-friendly so that each section of the manual is clear for people who are looking for things where, you know, this part applies to me, this other part doesn't, so I can, you know, look at that later. And that kind of phase one of that. I think my time frame for that, my goal would be to kind of look at that, not this year, because I think we have some policy review that's going to take up the rest of this year, but during the first half of calendar 21 would be my target for kind of accomplishing that. Any comments or questions so far? Okay, Marcy, were you about to ask something?
No, it sounds good.
Okay. Part two of sort of, go ahead, please.
I was just going to mention one other thing is that, what about policies that have to do with tech, that maybe we should be reviewing on a 5-year basis versus a 10-year basis, or maybe, do you want to flag those as well?
I think that's an interesting question. So, as far as the 5-year plan the strategic plan, let's say, is concerned, that might be part of what you're referring to. You know, there's a 5-year plan, and then the technology component of the strategic plan, I think, is reviewed, every 3 years. Now, I think it's a good, maybe what you're suggesting is we have a default that policies are reviewed every 10 years, but on a policy by policy basis, there may be certain categories of policies that we should change the schedule to be more frequent, 3 years or 5 years or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and technology-related policies would, you know, sort of naturally fall under that category. I definitely agree. So I think that could, and now that you're mentioning it, I think, David, you and I maybe even had discussed that as on a per policy basis, as we're renumbering it, also identify you know, what the review schedule would be for each of those policies. So I think it's a great point. And yes, I think that should be part of this sort of reorg. Again, no new text is being written in this phase, but we're just saying, hey, this is social media. It might be a faster moving, you know, topic than every 10 years. So maybe we better, you know, flag that every 3 or 5 or whatever it may be.
I think, Mike, we started that conversation in the context of these kind of schedules, which had been previously policies that give every year. So we did have some things that weren't on the 10-year schedule, like the fines and fees, and the holiday closings. Those types of things get looked at every year, even though they're technically policies. So we talked about maybe creating a few different categories. There are some things you set it and forget it for 10 years, but then there are some, as Carla mentioned, that you need to really.
Right. Okay. So great points. Again, big picture today, we're just talking about sort of a roadmap and getting that on the table for discussion. You know, from hearing good idea, bad idea, or, you know, let's, you know, take a second look at some of this, but that's the idea on the table. And I think a frequency per policy would be a good thing to identify as part of that. The second part of that would be moving the employee-related portions of the existing policy manual into a separate kind of document, also publicly available, but it would be an employee policy manual. And at the same time, I think there are, you know, right now our employee policy manual is our backstop is that we use the City of Charlottesville's policy manual. But in sort of looking at, you know, I had asked myself a couple of just use cases. An example, I asked myself, well, if the question was X, how would our existing policy manual or the existing City of Charlottesville policy manual handle this, or what would be the ruling under that, or the principles? And what I found is the Charlottesville current employee manual is very broad and really doesn't, it's really a lot more about logistical things like their salary bands and years of service, and some kind of procedural stuff. But then there's a portion of the Charlottesville that says, well, departments can make their own kind of department specific. So for example, anything dealing with any sort of dress code is not part of the Charlottesville policy manual. So as far as I can tell, we don't, for example, have a dress code. Now, culturally, certainly there's norms in place. But I feel like, I bet I could, if I were, and this is homework that I'm going to propose, just look at, for yourself, to convince yourself for the need of an employee policy manual, just Google something like top 10 employee manual pitfalls, and things that need to be covered. If you were starting a new business today, here's the 10 things you would need to cover. And just ask yourself on each use case that you might come up with, just look up what's actually there, and is that covered by our documents? And I bet we would find, 4 or 5 of them that kind of just fall through the cracks, because we don't really have our own dedicated policy manual. We have this hodgepodge of things that are in the existing library policy manual. The Charlottesville manual is very broad and refers to, well, departments can make their own. I think we would fall analogously under kind of the concept of the department, but we haven't really done that. So as homework, I invite people to kind of do that exercise and see if you reach some of those same conclusions. I did have a conversation with, again, probably 18 months or 2 years ago, with Kim Armentrout, who is well, at the time, her job title was public library consultant from the state library. So the state library, probably many of us know, has resources that are available, so that we don't, each library in Virginia doesn't need to reinvent the wheel on their own. They sort of the state library is a clearinghouse, and can put together, for example, our public library trustee handbook and other resources. But she said, yes, that's, clearly that's most libraries in Virginia have a dedicated employee policy manual. We could get some examples of them. It is a trustee responsibility to at least oversee the development of that document, and that's sort of carried out in the trustee handbook. I can cite you some of those references if you're interested. So that's my case for why, something I think I'd like to have on the table as an improvement. For the timing, this would be something perhaps the second half of 2021. I'd like to have it in place by the end of 2021, I guess. But it dovetails, as you can see, with the idea of reorganizing the library policy manual, because as we're doing that, we would be flagging, okay, here's some things that come out of the library policy manual, and then would move into a potential eventual separate library manual, employee manual. Comments or questions or thoughts here?
Mike, just 2 things really quickly. One, that notion is also in the 5-year plan, that we evaluate the need for a personnel manual for JMRL staff specifically. And 2, I also know that the city of Charlottesville is working on a redo of their personnel manual. So we want to work closely with them to make sure that, we are covering areas that, as Mike said, are not covered in that manual, and we're not going to be at odds with that. So this is a chance for us to kind of work closely with the HR department at the city of Charlottesville to come up with this document.
Right. So specifically, what David and I have discussed as a first step or a next step is for he and I think if one other trustee is interested, let me know, because there's room for, I think, 2 trustees. Sit down with David's contact at Charlottesville HR and just touch base with them, broach this topic, get their reaction or take, understand what their possible time frame is for this new manual, which I understand has been in the works, for some time. And then I think our goal, if there's no objection, David and I would do that before the next meeting, so within the next 2 months, and sort of report back at the next meeting, what did we learn? And again, that will inform this idea as part of a potential roadmap. So that's how we that's the thinking of how to move forward, with the small next step. So that's the big picture. Again, the table is open for, let me know if you think that's the right track, or other things need to be added or subtracted to that. Now is the time to kind of the table's open for discussion. So we do have a question. Do we need to consult with any of the local jurisdictions on this? We're certainly going to start by consulting with the city of Charlottesville, as we discussed. I don't know, what are your thoughts, David, in terms of, I mean, obviously this is something that we're transacting in public. It's just the question maybe is how tight a loop with each jurisdiction is appropriate to hold with something like this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point from Ophelia. We are, per the Administrative Services Agreement that JMRL has with the City of Charlottesville, we contract them basically for use of the HR department and their personnel policy. So all that's kind of guided from the regional agreement down, but we would want to make sure that we're not instituting anything that would go contrary to what one of the other jurisdictions would be doing. So we would probably want to, and when Mike and I first mapped this out over a year ago, from the current personnel policies that we have, there were maybe 4 or 5 of them that would go in a new personnel manual, and then we would build on that. So I think as we built new ones, Ophelia, we would want to run it around and see what other jurisdictions are doing, just to make sure that we're not going to institute anything that would be contrary to what a particular jurisdiction is doing.
I think that's a very good point. Just looking down the road, we would want to run it by, before putting anything into place. I think those are, you're exactly right, that we'd want to get those stakeholders to have an opportunity to, see what's on the table and weigh in. As a side note, when I'm talking about an employee manual, I'm not talking about inventing the wheel that we would sit down with a blank piece of paper and start writing from scratch. There are many, many library employee manuals out there, both in the state of Virginia and elsewhere. So just as a matter of practice, if I were tasked with coming up with a library manual for JMRL, I would start by finding that, asking the state library, give me 3 of your best examples. Starting from those, marking them up and redlining, well, this works for us, this doesn't work for us. It would be working from, something that's already in place rather than inventing a wheel from scratch. Okay, so if there are no other, I'm going to take silence as assent here. But this is something that David and I have talked about, so I think it's not something I just thought of yesterday. But if that's the case, I'm going to rewrite this as sort of a roadmap. Again, just some working notes, and I'll send that back out to the committee. Having said that, we can then turn to more near-term policies that are due in 2020, and those are the following. There are, and I'm just going to go, here's the order and sort of how I propose to slot them in or deal with them. So Friends of the Library, I'd like to look at today, because I think it's kind of simple, and we'll come back to that in a moment. There are and I'm just kind of going off the agenda also, there's the Public Employees Code of Ethics and Library Employee Codes of Ethics. Those are 2 examples that are talking specifically again about how employees conduct themselves. To me, they both read as an excellent potential introduction to a library manual, because they're just sort of broad principles that govern employees. So I sort of propose, even though they're due for review this year, I sort of propose to table those and bring them up again in the context of a possible employee manual, because that's where they would sort of make the most sense to fit. And I think, again, those are general principles. Just with a quick scan, I don't see anything in those principles that need to be, urgently modified. So I think it could be okay for a delay of up to a year with that to get them in the proper context with an employee manual. So that's my proposal as far as 2020 dealing with those 2. In October, I recommend that I'm sorry, am my dates right? August? Yes, October, thank you. October, I would slot in the unsolicited gifts of library materials and printing and copying. And then in December, I would propose to slot in conduct in JMRL and emergency clothing. So both of those are ones that are not up for review by our schedule. But David, you've sort of identified as those that you think are kind of timely.
I flagged both of those. The conduct one, staff have been talking about for a while, just some wording in there to help staff make decisions based on conduct in the library. And the emergency closing ones has been on everyone's mind since March, basically. And clearly it was designed for up to maybe 3 snow days, not for an extended closure like this. So we just need to review it and, in light of the things that we learned this year, adapt.
Okay, so those will be a little more substantial, and so the heads up is now to start kind of looking at those and thinking about the issues, and then December would be sort of the proposed time frame for those. And then once we get past December, we would sort of restart by looking at the required review policies from 2021 and kind of trying to slot those in, at least for the first half of the year, get half of those through. Generally speaking, so Friends of Libraries today, something like unsolicited gifts, I think there's probably some, at a very initial look, I think there are kind of some legal wrinkles involved in something like that. And so I want to encourage everyone on the committee to have a perspective that we should not just read what's already there and scratch our heads and say, hey, that sounds good to me, but sort of do a little bit of background research on some of these, look at other, examples of what are some other libraries, what do other libraries have in place, do a little bit, not, in some cases we may want to ask a lawyer for, I'm not sure if this particular one rises to that, but probably emergency closings, maybe. But we can also just do, a basic search with the Google lawyer JD, and get our own kind of introduction to, hey, here's some things where if we see that there's from the internet that there's some complexities that are being raised, then that might lead us to ask a lawyer or look at something more carefully. And if we see that that those articles aren't out there, then we might know that this might be a more straightforward type of topic. So my point being, unsolicited gifts, that's something I'm going to try and carry out on my own between now and October, and I'm going to invite everyone else to sort of do the same thing, and we'll put our heads together for discussion and see what everyone comes up with. Okay. Any other questions about that time frame? And then the next thing would be to actually open up Friends of the Library.
Mike?
Yeah.
I think one thing might be helpful is to give the rest of the board a heads up about the policies that are going to be discussed in the next policy meeting. Mm-hmm. So that if anybody has a particular interest in a policy, they might be able to at least come into the meeting or be prepared to discuss.
Okay, great.
You can give them a sort of outline of what's going to be covered.
Right. Okay, great. So that's part of the goal of having this sort of time frame conversation, is to kind of flag, slot some of those in. But that's a great point. You're asking in my report today, for example, that I can talk specifically about, hey, here's what we've got on tap for October.
That and maybe sending a reminder as we get closer to the time.
Okay, great. I will do that.
Good. Thanks.
Okay, so other comments or discussion? If not, we'll move to Friends of the Library. And I'm going to shuffle my papers here. Talk among yourselves.
Mike, do you want me to share that on the screen?
Sure, if you have it, yeah. Great.
Maybe.
And just while he's doing that, just to set expectations for today, if we read it and say, this sounds fine and we recommend no changes, that's a fine outcome. If we have specific changes that we can identify and be done with, that's a fine outcome. And if it's something that, hey, I want to take a step back and do some research on my own and come back to this, that's also a fine outcome as well. So I'm not encouraging that we have to, finalize whatever we're doing with this today. Okay, so would people like me to read it out loud, or are people happy just looking at it on the screen? It's not too long. Okay, so if I'm summarizing this, this is just establishing that there's this outside group called the Friends of the Library that has and what the relationship, that it's an independent relationship with JMRL. But of course, the board supports that group because they're supporting the library ultimately. And I think the key phrase here is that use of funds raised through the Friends activities must be consistent with the policies and mission of the library, even though the Friends board determines their own, use of funds and how they apply those.
I think it's pretty good. I mean, the Friends have their own bylaws and they're a whole, separate 501c3 organization. So I think if we just look at this through the lens of, what does the library expect of the Friends and what does the library want the public to know about this relationship? I think it's covered mostly here.
Yeah.
So I don't see a lot of change here.
Is there a reason to include the phrase such as book sales? Because it almost sounds as if it's limiting it just a little bit. I'm thinking about the fundraising that was done for the Nelson branch. If we didn't have that phrase, then it really sort of generalizes fundraising activity, which I think the library board ought to encourage.
I don't think that would be governed by, well, maybe, Marcy, because the Friends were the fiscal agent for Grow Nelson Library, basically.
Yes, they were.
So you're right. This would ultimately be the policy governing it.
It may just give people a broader idea about fundraising activities. I mean, the book sales have traditionally been really directed toward programming throughout the system. But I think we may be coming to a stage where we might need to consider expanding our fundraising activities through whatever means we can, whether it's through regional Friends groups or the central Friends group.
So I like the idea of making sure we're not limiting the Friends in the types of fundraising and making sure that's broad. I also do kind of like having awareness, somewhere that the book sales are a Friends activity. That's because those are sort of a prominently recognized type of activity. So I do like the idea that it's pointed out somewhere, who's doing those book sales and for what purpose. It's not those aren't library controlled funds that are being raised there.
How about including activities
right.
such as book sales, which are a long-standing tradition
Yeah.
of the JMRL Friends? It's a little longer than that, but I'd just like for it to be a little more open-ended.
Yeah, so let's think. So it sounds like we're sort of on the same page as the word. Yeah, my goal would just be to have book sales in somewhere, but let's make sure that we have a broad phrase otherwise. So let's see. What about, comma, including book sales, comma, physical improvement drives, something like that, comma, and other activities. So that.
Do you really want to circumscribe it? I mean, I think including traditional means of fundraising, such as the book sale, and not trying to limit it so that people aren't thinking narrowly about
right.
what the Friends can do.
Okay, so David, is there are you able to edit, or is,
Um,
do you have the master document somewhere?
this should be an editable version.
Yeah, if you're able to redline it, then maybe we can screen share at the board meeting today. And that could take the place of, you know, the printed handouts, which.
Can't do. So Marcy, are you suggesting just changing such as to including? Is it as simple as that, or?
Including book sales and I do that all the time. Including book sales and other fundraising activities. I don't know. No, that's not, because you've already got fundraising in there. And other activities approved by the library director or by the library board, and other activities.
Well, I mean, the board doesn't necessarily, or myself even, you know, it says here in the next line, you know, they're going to consult with me on these things.
Yes.
And everything should be in the best interest of the library, but I don't think we could put in here that our board is going to tell their board how to.
Oh, no. I was thinking of the activity, and I guess they're going to, so if they consult with you.
Yeah.
To start the fundraising activity. Is there a way that you can broaden it even more, including book sales and?
How about director shall encourage and appropriately facilitate, you know, et cetera, comma, whether book sales or other forms of fundraising activity. We're going to encourage it whether it's one or the other.
I got to say, I think such as is fine. I think that gives an example of one type of fundraising activity, but doesn't limit what the scope of the fundraising activities are. Or just say including but not limited to.
How about that? Including but not limited to book sales.
That's good. It's a little legalistic, but it.
Well,
but it opens it up a little bit.
Right.
Yeah,
Correct.
and coming up as the friends are looking at, you know, all the ways that they, well, the one way that they potentially have raised money in the past not really being an option right now. So they are looking at various other things that wouldn't be as one big book sale. It might be smaller ones.
Okay.
And I'd just like to encourage, you know, other specific branches, for example, if they feel that they have needs that
yes.
fit in with the library's mission, and the community is interested in supporting fundraising for those things.
We did get a Q&A, Great Minds Think Alike, from Latasha Richards, the circulation manager at Northside, who suggests includes but not limited to.
Okay.
Sorry, Latasha, I took credit for your answer.
Great.
Thank you.
So, and now that I'm looking at this, the first sentence reads, there is a special category, the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library, but is it not the case that we have branch friends also in our system? So should that be accommodated here somehow?
And the next line.
Hey guys.
Oh, okay. I got it.
This is Kathy.
Hey.
I have an emergency. I have to sign out. I'm sorry.
Okay, Kathy.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right. I hope everything's
Me too.
ends up okay on that end. Okay, so the local groups are covered. Okay.
So we have, you know, for example, I think Grow Nelson Library would fall under that sentence there.
Right.
And we've got friends groups and, you know, there's a very active Greene County Friends of the Library.
Sure. Okay. I have nothing else to suggest here. I think that's a good tweak.
I just, I'm not crazy about the first sentence. It just feels pretty clunky. And I guess I just don't understand why we don't say the library board recognizes and supports the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library. And then say, you know, which is a special category, which is a group of volunteers who support the library system through fundraising and you could say membership. I don't know. It just seems clunky to me.
How about just the library board recognizes and supports the regional Friends of the Jefferson Madison? No, that's too many regionals.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think they should be recognized as volunteers. And I see why region wide is in there because that's defining that the Friends support the whole system. But I think we could say that in a separate sentence or whatever. It just, library board recognizes.
But I do like the idea of conveying, again, to a new patron who's not familiar with libraries, the concept that the Friends of a library, the Friends of the Library is sort of a nationwide standardized concept. It's not something that's unique to JMRL. So I don't know if I'm suggesting that needs to be specifically stated here, but I do like conveying that impression, at least.
And that's fine. I just think that, we should have, a tighter first sentence. That's all. And then we could add a second sentence about the group being, volunteers and it's membership based.
If we just go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just that it supports the whole JMRL system. And then we could have the sentence and the third sentence read that there are also local groups of friends which provide for the needs and programs related to specific branches. Does that make sense?
You're proposing taking that region-wide role out of this and putting it into a second sentence?
Yeah. Yeah, and the region-wide, it just reads weird to me. Like, we consider ourselves a library system, right? Or a regional library system. The region-wide, it kind of makes it sound like it's going beyond our region. So like you could say Central Virginia or something.
So Carla, the library board recognizes and supports a role for a special category of volunteers, the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library.
So I would say the library board recognizes and supports the volunteer Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library. Like I would keep it simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if the Friends bylaws have some wording here too. I mean, it might be worth it to look at their. This is Carla's proposal. The library board recognizes and supports the volunteer Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library. The board also supports the activities of local groups of friends which provide for needs and programs related to the specific branches.
Right, but there's something in between describing that the Friends is.
How about we could say system-wide, Carla? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, system-wide. That they're
I would be surprised if the Friends didn't like being known as a special category. I think that they probably see themselves that way, you know? And rightly so. They've done a lot for the library over the years.
Yeah, it just sounds awkward.
Well, there's another section about volunteers, because we've dealt with that relatively recently, I think, in a continuing education. I mean, I think that's part of our policies, right, David?
We have a separate volunteer policy.
Exactly. So I don't know.
What if Carla, what if we, I think you're feeling it's just a little too many phrases in one sentence. So what if we've said the library board recognizes and supports a special category of volunteers, the Friends of the Jefferson Regional Madison Library. In other words, just take out a region-wide role out of the first sentence.
Yeah.
And then move the region-wide role elsewhere.
And make it system-wide so that it doesn't sound like we're taking over the entire Central Virginia area.
Yeah. So then the second sentence could say, Friends of JMRL have a system-wide role
or support activities system-wide support.
Where I'm trying to head is that this sentence will talk about that there's a system-wide group and then there's also local groups.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to use support though, because there's support in the first sentence. How about the Friends of JMRL have?
How about while the Friends of JMRL have a system-wide role, comma, the board also supports.
About
have a system-wide role.
Does that mean anything to people besides us?
Yeah, that's always a great question.
I
think you go ahead.
And so, to me, it's just read, the library board recognizes and supports the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library, period. The Friends of JMRL are a volunteer group, or
a special category of all, yeah.
Right, that, and once again, support, but who, basically they raise money to support programs and purchases throughout the JMRL library system.
So the library recognizes and supports the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library. The Friends of JMRL
are a special category of volunteers. I do like the special category.
Okay.
As kind of as
Can I quickly read in their bylaws, the purpose for which the organization is formed are exclusively charitable and educational, and it's got 5 bullet points. To maintain an association of persons interested in the welfare of JMRL, to focus public attention on the library, to stimulate the use of the library's resources and services, to receive and encourage gifts, endowments, and bequests to the library, and to support and cooperate with the library in developing library services and facilities for the community. So just to help inform this, that's what the regional friends are saying. And I think that's too much to get into here.
How about a special category of volunteers who support the mission? of JMRL through community activities and fundraising?
Because there's also the last sentence that the board supports the efforts of the Friends to increase community awareness of the mission and services of the library. And I think that should be part of the first paragraph.
How about the Friends of JMRL, a special category of volunteers to support the regional library system through fundraising and increasing community awareness of the mission and services of the library.
Great.
That is, yes.
So that means we would cut the last sentence.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm never going to get it back to what it started as. So.
We've got the hard copy.
Yeah, right. Through fundraising and increasing community awareness of the mission and services. Okay, so now the first paragraph reads, the library board recognizes and supports the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library. The Friends of JMRL are a special category of volunteers who support the regional library system through fundraising and increasing community awareness of the mission and services of the library. The board also supports the activities of local groups of friends which provide for needs and programming related to the specific branches. The red line is it's long.
I think it's really
I think it's good.
right on target though.
Yeah.
So I have two typo type tweaks.
Yeah.
Library in your red line, do you want that to be capital, the last word? That seems to be the standard.
Yeah.
And then in the next paragraph, first sentence, it says the Jefferson Madison Regional Library Friends. I think that's not the official name. It's different from where it was used the first time.
Where do you see that, Mike?
Well, I think the official name is Friends of, it's right where you're one line below your cursor.
The Jefferson.
Yeah, that's different from the name of that's not the exact name.
Oh, just strike out Friends and then put it Friends of.
Yeah. And then I think we are going to have to wrap this meeting very shortly here.
We are indeed.
And I think I'm just looking at their website. Technically, it says Friends of Jefferson Madison Regional Library. There's no the.
And I think,
Yeah, I would take that out.
Krista, correct me if I'm wrong, but there shouldn't be a hyphen between Jefferson and Madison. Is that
I
right?
thought we changed that. And also in their bylaws, though, they do say, oh, I just had their bylaws up, the Friends of the Jefferson. So they're not consistent themselves.
Okay.
In their bylaws, they're called the.
We've got the Friends, you mean the Friends of the, it says? Yeah, the name of the organization shall be the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library.
Mhm.
They say, yeah, the Friends of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library.
So
But-
Mike, I think we should stick with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that means
Their
this.
logo doesn't include the second the, but
We'll
yeah,
tell
but
them.
whatever it is, we should, be
We'll
consistent.
get them to correct it, right?
I
Yeah.
think in the bylaws, it's.
How do I do a strike through of a hyphen? Let's just. We'll make
And that's just something we've decided. They still use a hyphen in their bylaws.
Sorry, let's go with our own. Okay, so is this ready to bring to the full library board today? I think it is, but anybody?
So we would read it today, and then they would vote on it in September.
Right. So
That's
the purpose of reading it today would just be able to move that.
Vote on it, right?
as long as Mike, if you make the board aware that if they have concerns or questions or anything, then bring them up. It doesn't have to be voted on in September if there's more work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the normal procedure. It's just a matter of the time. It's either we do it this month, start, look at the red line this month, or we start by looking at the red line next month. But I think we can do it today. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna stop.
I think we can sign off then if there's nothing else. I will send back out sort of a roadmap based on what we've talked about today, and we'll go from there.